It's House of Strauss. We're joined by Lee Fang, the talented man of integrity. It's true. I don't know why I'm laughing. You just rarely call people that. Fantastic reporter at the Eponymous. Is that the right way to pronounce that? Substack that he has. We've had him on before, and you have done a great job writing about the topic that is roiling the political culture currently. You did a great job on this piece, man. It was artistically done. It wasn't just rich in information, which it was, but it was done like a proper article with an excellent tease before the paywall. It's titled, Yes, American Corporations Exploit H-1B Visas to Lower Wages. I'm going to give you the difficult job of recapitulating some of what you're talking about, and then we can get into this just fascinating subject and how it's already representing a crack up on the right in Trump's coalition before the inauguration. Basically, folks, this is not going to be a sports heavy podcast, but I believe it will be interesting if you join us for the journey. Lee, go.
Well, I'm not sure exactly where to begin, but just as a very simple primer, there are a number of specialized temporary work visa programs. One of them is the H-1B visa. It was codified in 1990, originally intended both in statute and in the legislative debate as something designed for really filling very specific technical knowledge gaps in America. If there are certain scientists or technicians or engineers who, we couldn't hire from our own universities, couldn't produce from our own society, we would bring them from abroad. It was a very kind of focused program. And it has expanded over the years. It's still used for its original intent. I don't think anyone truly disputes that there are some people who come over from H-1B visas who are needed, that, it's difficult to find them in the job market. So, there are, I think, very compelling arguments in favor of this program. But it's also used, at least according to its critics, and I think there's a lot of interesting anecdotal evidence out there, to lower wages. That, if you're a big corporation or even a medium-sized company and, your biggest costs are typically labor. I mean, it's just kind of the basics of capitalism here. And you see an opportunity to bring in workers who who might work for less. This is a great opportunity because it's essentially, again, according to critics, kind of an indentured servitude program, because when a worker comes here, it's not like they enjoy the normal bargaining power of a typical American worker. You're tied to your visa. So if you come in from Microsoft and you're working an IT job and you want to bargain for better pay or conditions, they could cancel your visa and essentially send you back home. So, you're basically finding a more docile workforce in addition to one that might be paid less.
And that's, I think, the key point. And I was not familiar with this topic, or at least nearly as much as you were beforehand. But that right there is key, I think, to press in on, because there's been some rhetoric saying, oh, well, are you just afraid of competing against the world American tech worker? You're just afraid you can't really keep up. And what's lost in that is that power right there to facilitate somebody's immigration status is a non-salary leverage that these companies have at their disposal, that you're trying to bargain for more money and they're effectively paying this other worker in the ability to eventually become a citizen at no cost to their company. And that's the dynamic. And if anything else, you could argue that we need it for whatever reason, but it certainly is not fair. And it would theoretically have downward pressure on the wages of people working in these industries. That all makes a lot of sense to me. And there has been an explosion of anti-Indian sentiment and racism on Twitter X. What do we call that? Is that anti-Indic? I don't even know what the Latin term is.
It's crazy. It predated this particular debate. I've noticed this over the last year, 2 years.
Yeah.
Is that just me? Like just random.
I've noticed it.
Like the hygienic stuff.
People say Pajit or Jeets and that sort of thing. And
they're new slurs. I had never heard that until last year.
Yeah, I didn't even know about that, and I came to it very philo-indic, and I've been brainwashed by all the racism on X, and now I feel, no, there's been that. And I think that some of the people who want these programs, especially on what we might be calling the tech right or big tech, are really fixating on that aspect and positioning themselves as being against racism. And that's why they want these visas. But unfortunately for them,
it's a common foil. I mean, just to stop really quickly, it's like, okay, there are racists out there on a lot of topics. If you talk about affirmative action, you're going to hear from people who are white supremacists. If you talk about crime, you're going to hear from white supremacists. If you talk about, any number of issues, you're going to hear from bigots on the internet. But that doesn't mean the underlying issue doesn't have legitimacy on a non-racial basis.
Yeah, and it didn't work well enough for them rhetorically, I believe, the people arguing for this and trying to position themselves as being against racism. And I think there are a variety of reasons for that we could get into. One is that a lot of these people just started caring about racism 5 minutes ago and in service of this thing they want. And that's very transparent to everybody. So that's part of it. But yeah, it's a lot of things all at once. And we could go so many places with this, but one thing that was amusing to me about this whole crack up, I felt like I was almost watching a game of Simon Says, where Musk and Trump are aligned. Musk is even more vocal than Trump because he's constantly communicating. And there are a lot of right-wing influencers who I think got comfortable with this rhythm of Musk says something, I like that, I support that, I'm with that. Musk says another thing, I like that, I support that. And it's like a game of Simon Says where they're reflexively reacting to the prompts, but to really play the game properly, you have to wait for when Simon says it to know that it is clear and you are free to do it. And so I saw a few MAGA influencers and people on the right, because Elon Musk was for these visas and argued for them, and some other people did as well. They leapt into it, and it looks like they just lost half their audience forever. Like it blew back on them. Maybe that's too much and we're trapped in a moment, but it hurt them reputationally. It damaged them. Thinking about Patrick Bet David, for instance, who we've been amused by on this podcast as this strange, charismatic guy with a scammy sort of background, allegedly some sort of MLM scheme, and all that got brought to the fore and got brought up. Vivek Ramaswamy's history and how he got rich and accusations about that gets brought up. And a lot of people, they got burned following Elon Musk down this particular path. That was interesting, and I will say amusing to witness.
Yeah, I think in terms of the Simon Says, people are primed to see Elon Musk say very kind of contrarian, populist, anti-establishment rhetoric, and to engage in this kind of internet populism that helped develop this kind of political fan base. And then suddenly when they hear him sound identical to someone like Bill Gates or the Chamber of Commerce demanding cheaper workers, there's this like right-wing class consciousness that just exploded overnight, that this looked in some ways like something you'd see from a typical House Democrat progressive or Jacobin reading left-winger. They're saying, oh, look at Tesla, you lay off 30,000 people or whatever the number is, 14,000, 4,000. I don't want to get the number wrong, but big numbers last year while you were applying for even more H-1B visas. Look at your kind of history of exploiting workers. Same kind of arguments made against Vivek for defrauding allegedly investors and some of these other influencers who are using H-1Bs, looking at the way that they had treated workers historically and some of the low wages they had paid. It's like, wait a second, that's all it took. And just a moment, suddenly these MAGA populists, the line between left and right on economics just goes away.
Yeah, I could not have foreseen that it would happen. It would happen that quickly. I think you also did a great job in your article of demonstrating these instances where there were tech layoffs that were effectively concurrent with H-1B additions. It's at the same time where there can be this argument that, yes, you're all going to benefit from this, but then tangibly, it just doesn't seem to be working out that way in real life. And I think this is not a subject of expertise for myself, and I don't reflexively sneer at the tech tycoons. I try to be fair to everybody. I know some of these people, and I don't know Elon Musk, but I actually believe that he is very sincere about his biggest objectives. I don't think that he's just about money, for instance. I don't think he lives his life to fly on private planes and enjoy luxuries. But there's this issue of non-alignment of incentives where Elon Musk during the campaign is just draping and shrouding himself in American flags, American rhetoric, America first. But if you just read what he said, that's not his primary objective in life. His primary objective in life is to become interplanetary and put a man on Mars. Now, I don't scoff at that. I mean, that seems like a pretty cool goal. I don't have many thoughts on that goal, but that's his goal. That's his main obsession, the thing he wants. And anything that gets in the way of that is a problem and must be hacked away. And if you talk to people who are in his orbit, a lot of what has happened is that he viewed the Democrats and the left with their bureaucracy and everything else as an impediment to that goal. And their anti-meritocratic hiring processes and quotas and everything else that was an impediment and needed to be destroyed so we could get to Mars. And it's almost a little similar perhaps to the AI paperclip problem, where if the AI prompt is just all about, you know, making more paperclips, it will kill us all, right? If the objective is just powerful enough that nothing else matters, I think you can make an argument that from Elon's perspective, you need the maximum amount of people on visas for the just maximum amount of engineering talent to be brought here where he is to be able to do these jobs and achieve these objectives. And I don't think there's much of a consideration for whether or not that's good for the people currently living in this country. I don't think that is his primary objective, which is fair. That's fair for it not to be, but there's not an admission about that. I'm sure he could rationalize it and, make it not so incongruous. I'm sure he could make an argument for why this would be what's best for America. I know they're making that argument that this is what America needs to win. You know, who we are as Americans, not exactly defined. What winning is, not exactly defined. I'm rambling a lot without giving you a question, Lee. It's just my observation that his objective primarily is not the greatness of America, even if that's the rhetoric that he has been channeling in pursuit of this political power to achieve his objectives.
Yeah, I mean, this is the big conflict within both parties, really. I mean, you see this now with Ezra Klein and others talking about an abundance agenda on the left that, look at California, things cost too much, we don't build houses. Just generally, we have this retirement crisis of more people aging more and more, and exploding healthcare costs. Well, there's one way to look at this, and it's from a utilitarian view, and say, well, you want cheaper food, then let's import more workers to pick our crops. You want cheaper healthcare, let's bring in more doctors and nurses to work at our elderly care centers and at our hospitals. Oh, you want to build more houses? Well, again, if we could bring more workers and bring down housing costs. It's just this kind of looking at America as an Excel spreadsheet and just looking at costs and driving GDP growth hits a kind of cultural, dynamic that Trump has actually, better than any other politician, put his finger on. There's a pulse of America that's just out of sync with this kind of go-go tech mentality of let's grow the economy, let's get our company sold, let's go to Mars. And people who are looking around and in their communities and saying, hey, this is too much change. Why do I have new cultures and new peoples here, constantly coming here? I didn't consent to this. And there are tertiary effects. There are people who are negatively affected in terms of economics with this mass migration. Yes, it does promote growth in general. And this argument could be made certainly about H-1Bs. I think there's very strong evidence that it helps the major corporations that bring them in. It helps economic growth broadly. It helps economic expansion. Some people even argue that, and there's some research to suggest this, when companies bring in a lot of HB1 workers, it might free up hiring in other areas. But for certain industries or for certain classifications of workers, particularly in IT, there's also strong evidence that's holding down wages. IT is a big field. HB1 visas are overwhelmingly going to these companies, not just the major big tech companies that we all know, Amazon, Facebook, Microsoft, Meta, what have you. They're also going to these IT specialist firms that will come in for any major corporation and then provide kind of the back office IT services. And this HCL, Tata, Cognizant, these are less name brand companies, but these are multi-billion-dollar companies that largely source their employees from India using H-1B visas. They are replacing American workers. There's many anecdotes from the past of them coming in and having American workers train in order to obtain their own severance as they're being laid off, to train their own replacement workers. This is like, like if you look at, okay, maybe this isn't happening for this is a minority of cases. This is not what's happening everywhere all at once in terms of H-1B. But the emotional and psychological damage, the political issue of that is tremendous. It's just like, if a police officer kills someone, this is someone who is sworn to protect, and so of course that might pack more heft politically and in the media than if some random stranger kills another bystander, or when an immigrant kills someone. Yes, that's just another murder. But this is someone who is not an illegal immigrant. If this was someone that was not supposed to be in this country and they're murdering someone, of course that's going to gain more media attention. For someone that was brought in with a special visa that was supposed to fill a skill gap, but our American workers are being laid off and required in order to receive their severance to train this person, even if it's not a majority of cases, this is incredibly politically damaging, and it leads to this type of blowback. I mean, you've seen this kind of H-1B discourse in different corners of the internet and different corners of social media and Reddit. We've seen it blow up a few times in the past. But it kind of just makes sense that it's finally hitting a breaking point, because this is the true kind of dividing line between the big tech companies and Trump in terms of rhetoric and in policy.
I mean, it's almost a realignment after the realignment to what you're saying, where even on Reddit, which is known to be a liberal bastion where the mods are liberal, on at least one of the tech worker subreddits, people were very much against these visas and very down on them and very negative about them. I think part of what's happened in the broader argument, Paul Graham was tweeting that everybody in tech was on the side of the visas and the people who weren't. And I know enough people in tech who are saying, no, a lot of people are against this. They just don't want to get fired. They don't want to speak out and get defenestrated from the industry. And a lot of the anons making these arguments are people who work in tech. And I know people who are libs in tech who don't like this and don't like that this has happened. And they are quietly in support of the argument against. And that's part of what has played out. And I think also Vivek has just done the biggest America First mitzvah, if I'd use a word like mitzvah for America First, just by making the least charismatic argument for this policy.
I think for your listeners, we should recap his argument, because I saw it. Was it on Christmas Day or the day after Christmas? It was
something like that. It was certainly a Christmas present for the people who oppose this policy. I have the whole thing pulled up. It's a little long, but I will read it. It's written in very small text, so forgive me if I screw this up. But yes, this is arguing for this policy. I will read it. The reason top tech companies often hire foreign-born and first-generation engineers over native, in quotations, Americans isn't because of an innate American IQ deficit, a lazy and wrong explanation. A key part of it comes down to the C word, culture. Tough questions demand tough answers, and if we're really serious about fixing the problem, we have to confront the truth, all caps. Our American culture has venerated mediocrity over excellence for way too long, at least since the 90s and likely longer. That's the moment that Vivek came into sentience, by the way, the 1990s. That doesn't start in college. It starts young, all caps. A culture that celebrates the prom queen over the math Olympiad champ or the jock over the valedictorian will not produce the best engineers. A culture that venerates Corey from Boy Meets World or Zach and Slater over Screech and Saved by the Bell or Stefan over Steve Urkel and Family Matters will not produce the best engineers. Fact. I know multiple sets of immigrant parents in the 90s who actively limited how much their kids could watch those TV shows precisely because they promoted mediocrity. That was my one critique of Family Matters, is promotion of mediocrity, but I will get back to the reading. And their kids went on to become wildly successful STEM graduates. More movies like Whiplash, fewer reruns of Friends, more math tutoring, fewer sleepovers, more weekend science competitions, fewer Saturday morning cartoons, more books, less TV, more creating, less chillin', in quotations. More extracurriculars, less hanging out at the mall, in quotations. Most normal American parents look skeptically at those kind of parents. More normal American kids view the kinds of kids with scorn. If you grow up aspiring to normalcy, normalcy is what you will achieve. Now close your eyes and visualize which families you knew in the 90s or even now who raise their kids according to one model versus the other. Be brutally honest. Normalcy doesn't cut it in a hyper-competitive global market for technical talent. And if we pretend like it does, we'll have our asses handed to us by China. This can be our Sputnik moment. We've awakened from slumber before, and we can do it again. Trump's election hopefully marks the beginning of a new golden era in America, but only if our culture fully wakes up. A culture that once again prioritizes achievement over normalcy, excellence over mediocrity, nerdiness over conformity, hard work over laziness. That's the work we have cut out for us, rather than wallowing in victimhood and just wishing or legislating alternative hiring practices into existence. I'm confident we can do it. Oh boy. Wow.
This is our sleepover Sputnik moment on social media.
Yeah, I did not know sleepovers were the problem. That sounded pro-social to me, the idea of sleepovers. And I mean, I don't know what happens to the normal people in this vision for America, this global rat race that's depicted by Vivek, but my God, there might be something to it. By the way, if he said this and it wasn't in service of this particular policy, I might be more inclined to hear it out and go, okay, maybe we need to tiger mom a little harder. I certainly, in my marriage, am more, hey, you got to do this and that. And my wife is a little bit more, hey, sleep over, and you achieve a balance theoretically. I get it. I get that sort of, like, that sort of holds appeal to me. I'm not rejecting of that completely, but there's something so sleazy about trying to push this policy and then making this ridiculous 1990s sitcom based argument that it's because you guys are lazy that you need to be forced to compete with the entirety of the world, earning lower wages, having this non-salary incentive of the visa against you and your companies. Absolutely insane, crazy to make that argument. He's nuked his political career. And I guess if you're trying to get him on the couch and figure out why, it's because he really believes it, because why else would he do that?
Yeah, this is his kind of the Brahmin Indian Bill Cosby moment. He's like, America, pull your pants up.
Yeah. I saw various black commentators having fun with that one.
Well, yeah, people are saying that this is how black Americans have had to be talked to. Like this is how a commentary about their family raising, culture sounds.
It would be quite creative.
Ways.
Yes and no. I don't think anybody has ever made the argument that family matters is the problem in black America. And I mean, it's almost like he missed that a lot of these characters are beloved, that people really like Steve Urkel. and they liked Screech, and that seems to have passed him by. But yes, I don't think many people have argued that family matters is what's wrong with Black America, and I believe he's also the first to argue that Boy Meets World is the problem with white America, tacitly, I suppose.
No, all the cultural references are funny, and they chip away at his larger point, but he makes kind of the nativist, for lack of a better word, MAGA, shut down immigrant argument better than anyone can, because he's basically conceding that this is not about just filling a skills gap. He wants more immigration to change American culture. He's saying it's not just about economics. It's not just about inventing the newest widget or, patent. It's actually about getting in, changing our high schools, changing our way of life, and getting rid of our sleepovers.
Making the world one giant Stuyvesant High School is the vision of Vivek, which is appealing to some people. It's a very good high school.
I think what you said about if this was in a vacuum and applied on the affirmative action debate in terms of how to revive American competitiveness, in almost any other context, there are valuable insights from this post, or at least the sentiments underlying it. It's just to make it about immigration, to say we are trying to replace you. It's
because you're lazy.
Because you're lazy. Because America is fundamentally a backwards, emotional, not cognitive, STEM focused society. We need to replace Americans with Indian imports of engineers. That's essentially what he's saying.
Well, and then it's combined with this other aspect that's uncomfortable to get into, because a lot of the visa argument is about more middle class jobs. But I think Sarah Hayter was making the point. Let me pull up the tweet. I hope it's the correct tweet as I read it. Aside from the visa abuse issue, it shouldn't be surprising that the backlash is focused so intently on Indian diaspora. Their success is so wildly disproportionate to their numbers, it is bound to chafe/unnerve. I thought we'd see it in the Bobby Jindal / early Nikki Haley era, honestly. And Sarah is of South Asian descent, for those who do not know, if that's relevant context. I don't know. But yeah, I think it's also happened concurrent with all the major companies seem to be run by Indian or Indian American CEOs, and people, they get shaken up by these sorts of things in a society. And that seems to be, I'm not excusing it as a reaction, but I remember taking a history of the Holocaust course in college, and it was an excellent course. And it wasn't just, I don't know, a Steven Spielberg two-dimensional rendered history. It really got deeper into a lot of the social dynamics that led to it, and how you had a situation where there was a liberalization, the Pale of Settlement was opened up, and all of a sudden in these very traditional European societies, Lee's crossed his arms right now. He's talking about the Holocaust. I'm on guard for anything. I'm on guard for anything that's going to happen. I don't know what he's going to say.
We can turn up the notch a few times on this podcast.
So, if you believe what has happened, no. But
let's peel back the conspiracy.
But effectively, what happened to these societies is that suddenly, at the University of Berlin or the University of these various Eastern European countries, you've got this, as Amy Chua has called, a market dominant minority, where half the people at these universities are Jewish. And this isn't happening right now. This is hundreds of years ago, before TV, right? And that provoked a significant populist backlash. And I think that's part of what's happening as well, where Vivek's not just talking about replacement on a middle class level, or that's not what's being conveyed. It's this idea that you are going to be now effectively run by people who have this perspective on life that is different from your lazy, soft sleepover perspective on life. And that is also perhaps roiling some of these sentiments that are happening concurrent with the policy questions and these deeper questions of what even is a nation, what even are borders.
No, I think that's right. And I think there are a lot of parallels between some waves of Jewish immigration to the U.S. and this initial attempt to anglicize names and kind of initially conceal their Jewish identity, and that was certainly the case with some of the initial waves of Indian immigrants. Bobby Jindal, Catholic, very kind of folksy American, outside of his name and skin color, not that different than any typical Southern Republican politician. Nikki Haley aligned herself with evangelicals, did not kind of openly practice. I guess she converted, although she sometimes still attends Sikh practice.
Sure.
I'm not sure if they're exactly religious, but does not openly identify as Sikh for sure. Vivek is interesting because he's really the very first South Asian American politician who is charismatically Hindu. You've seen all those clips of him defending the Hindu faith, talking about his religious practices in front of evangelical audiences in Iowa or, really anywhere. He's done this college campus tour where he allows anyone to challenge him, debate bro status. And there are Christians who challenge his faith and say it's fundamentally pagan. And I don't know, there's a lot of interesting clips on the internet of him defending his Hindu faith. And, I give him huge props for that because it doesn't look easy to do, especially in that context. But it's probably part of this backlash a little bit. We have a lot of South Asian politicians. Few have become as prominent as he has. Few are as confrontational, and few are as outwardly Hindu. So for Americans to step back and exactly what you're mentioning and say, okay, well, something like 12 of the top 100 corporations in America are run by Indian Americans. The average income for Indian Americans is one of the highest of any ethnic groups. And I think I've seen some databases where they're the highest. And they're a very recent immigrant group. There are small waves in the early 20th century, a trickle after Hart-Celler in 1965, but it really picked up in the 80s and 90s. So it's really quite recent. And to achieve all this success, and then suddenly, in just in the last few years, kind of have a few national spokesmen like Vivek, who are not attempting to fully assimilate in terms of changing their religion or their names, and to do this kind of debate bro thing where he's saying, we're going to bring more and we're going to change your culture and get rid of your sleepovers. I mean, it all kind of comes together.
I mean, we could be living in the Indian century. This isn't theoretically going back the other direction. This is a country with over 1 billion people that has rapidly industrialized. And I think this will be more of a feature of life in America and these other European countries that will need to be sorted out. And so now that's part of this whole conversation as well. It's just, it all happens simultaneously. Did you expect this, by the way? Did you think this would be a thing in the way it just suddenly became a thing, this whole fight?
I mean, I didn't predict this exact thing. I mean, it just kind of makes sense if you asked where the actual fissures would be. I mean, the other question is what do we do with all these other immigrant programs? We have the H-2A farm temporary visa. There's less discussion around that. I think it's farmers, big farm corporations quietly support all these visa programs, very loudly support, Republican politicians and agenda items. But there's really no discussion around getting rid of this because so many farm communities are dependent on H-2As. But you could see a scenario in the near future where, the DHS starts engaging in mass deportation, starts engaging in interior enforcement. Of course, they're going to prioritize people with a criminal record, but that can only go so far if they want to actually hit big numbers, what was talked about in the campaign.
That's okay, but that's okay because Hispanics like sleepovers, according to the data I've seen. So therefore, I mean, I'm kidding, but there's this element to it of why the tech right arguments fell on deaf ears. This sort of, this is racism, this is racism. It's that nobody thinks they care about that. And part of why is that, and I'm saying there are a lot of different people. These are complex individuals with their own considerations, but Elon, let's face it, has been, I don't want to go so far as to say racism posting, but let's just say he's been making some very nativist arguments on this platform that he runs. He's been putting these memes out there about how you can't have people shame you over your ancestors. Actually, your ancestors were great. He's been doing that. He's been making those arguments. He's been inveighing against the menace from the South on the southern border. And you can't just do all that and either do it or be along for the ride as it's happening and then turn around and go, we're against racism. Racism's wrong. Racism's bad. I mean, it's just, it doesn't work. It doesn't work for a variety of reasons. One of the reasons is that you're on the right now. So it's just good luck with it. It's just a different state of play over there. You're going to have to actually make your argument for why this is working for the country. But that's another observation of mine, where there are a lot of people who run these big tech companies who, again, I don't know if philo-indic is the word, but I'm pretending like it is because it's easier, who are perhaps philo-indic, as I think we all are passively, but they weren't feeling that way about these other immigration questions, and that's obvious to everybody watching.
And, he's been making these claims, boosting other accounts, making similar arguments, looking at how, okay, all these Haitians come in, all these Venezuelans, they get temporary protected status to allow them to work. They eventually put down roots. Some of them get permanent residency. They then bring over family. That becomes chain migration. That's how small numbers seem to multiply. And then we get these massive macro numbers of people who started out with undocumented status or coming in illegally, gaining a foothold, and then kind of becoming this permanent community in America. Let's set that aside for a second. He's been talking about that a lot. He's boosting a lot of videos, a lot of tweets. But couldn't you make essentially the same argument about H-1Bs? 85,000 H-1Bs. Okay, but then there could be 3-year, then 6-year extensions. They can now bring their wives and their families over. Those H-1B visa holders have got their whole family over. Their wives or their spouses, their husbands are working. Then their employers then apply for, EB3 status for permanent residency. Suddenly this program that was intended for 85,000 people blossoms into 600,000 people a year on this program. And there are similar kind of like cousins to the H-1B that are less well known. The OPT and like the O1 visa program. Some of these programs for foreign students and people of exceptional ability to then temporarily work in STEM fields. They get extension after extension after extension, and then suddenly a permanent residency, green card, and then they can bring family over. Wait a second, this is exactly or very similar to the arguments that Elon was making about the other groups that were not benefiting his industry. A lot of these Venezuelans are working in poultry farms and agricultural and construction jobs. Well, the H-1B folks are working at Tesla and Google, and there's another sector of the economy where this kind of mass migration, and it actually is mass. Like you see a lot of the defenders of the H-1B say, "Well, it's only 85,000. How could you be upset about this?" But you look at how given the rules of these programs, how it's effectively playing out. It's kind of close to 1 million.
Yeah, it's not just one guy coming over, and it does lead to chain migration, and effectively the non-coherent argument being made by the people who like this on what we're calling the tech right, without them saying it, is that, look, we have the right kind of racism. You have the wrong kind of racism.
That's a good point.
We are, against these groups. We don't like these groups. We don't think that they're going to help our GDP, or they're not going to help us invent the next rocket that's going to take us to Mars. So we're against that. And that's our position. And look, the thing that's the most horrific in the world is when people are saying mean things about Indians on Twitter through anon accounts, but when the president of the United States says that Haitian immigrants are eating cats and dogs, that's just, it's just banter. That's just, it's nothing. That's nothing really to be concerned about. So it doesn't hang together as an argument.
That Indians are eating cats and dogs, and then because Elon's been revoking certification and banning people. Yeah. Is it that different?
It's really not. It's really not. And it gets into these deep questions about what even is a country. And I think this is part of, I think for some of this podcast, I want us to just talk about the tech people, because we're in the Bay Area and we are often in their midst without being, these people. And I've been in situations with you, Lee, where I've almost, when people are talking, been looking over at you going like, do you see how crazy this is? Do you see how crazy these people are? Because they're brilliant. So many of them are actually brilliant, but a lot of their brilliance is focused on tearing down barriers. There's this deep want to transcend, and it's inspiring in a way, and innovation comes from it. But then you often have a person who they deeply believe that borders and nationhood are these silly artifacts of the past that need to be sloughed off for us to truly become whatever their image is for what we all need to become. I mean, these are people, I've been in their presence where they're talking about genetically engineering their children and using whatever the new version of CRISPR technology is to make sure that they have a 200 IQ. Their fixation is just not in alignment. It's not in alignment with what most people want and what grounds most people. They don't want to be grounded. They want to be ungrounded. They want to be in space. That's not where most people are. Most people want something familiar that connects them with the past.
Yeah, that's right. You just think about normal business, like any random business in America, car body repair shop, metal shop, whatever, a muffin shop, whatever you're running, there's small margins. You're making a little bit of money if you're successful. This is a world where 90% margins on software are normal. I mean, there's maybe never been a greater engine of human prosperity as the tech industry in just a small period of time. Just think about it. The last 30 years of the growth of the software industry, particularly in the Bay Area, but in a few other pockets of the country. I mean, how many billionaires have been minted? How many tens of thousands of 100 millionaires and tens of millionaires? I mean, it's mass production of wealth. And a lot of those people are very intelligent. I mean, I think the vast majority are. I mean, I think it is relatively meritocratic, especially compared to many other industries. And perhaps it leads to some delusions of grandeur when you have that much rapid accumulation of wealth and power and prestige. The ability to reshape the material world around you just with lines of code or with certain types of engineering makes you think that you can reshape other parts of life that I think are much more sticky and difficult. And you see a lot of fumbles from the tech world trying to get into politics and trying to shape policy because it's another beast, like dealing with bureaucracy and dealing with the complexities of a society that a lot of people don't have the same human dynamics, whether that's money or the ability to work from home and generate so much cash. There's as this kind of tech elite has asserted itself more and more politically. I mean, they went all in on Democrats, and now just over the last year or two, it's become much more bipartisan, much more influential on the right. There is this kind of dissident right that's closely tethered to tech wealth and major tech voices in the VC and tech industry. You're seeing a conflict. I mean, it's a conflict in worldview and values and what society should actually look like. I'm broadly optimistic, and I have some guarded optimism around CRISPR and bioengineering, biohacking, around driverless cars, all of this stuff. But how it actually plays out and affects normal people who are not the beneficiaries, the direct beneficiaries, maybe they're the tertiary beneficiaries, but the folks that are going to be perhaps harmed the first, like if we're that upset about H-1Bs, which I think are a big problem that are exploited, but are pretty small in comparison to what driverless cars will do in this country in terms of reshaping jobs and causing economic turmoil. There's a big separation. I don't think there's a lot of discussion between the kind of the masters of the universe in the Bay Area and the average person. I mean, they're suddenly experiencing each other on social media, but that's about it.
Well, I think what's disturbing is the lack of respect that is communicated for what is, where you read that Vivek tweet and it's, well, where's the respect or the admiration of the culture at all? I'm just hearing a criticism. I'm not hearing anything good that's involved in all of this. this contempt for normalcy and for normal people. Well, most people are normal people. You have contempt for them. You have contempt for their culture, and you want to be the one to bring us forward. I find that terrifying. I don't go around my day encountering people with normal blue collar jobs who are by and large friendly and pleasant to deal with and look at them as some sort of failure that must be corrected. That just sounds like society to me. That we need a society where most normal people can live with dignity if they apply themselves. That seems obvious to me that you're not hearing that. That's not a perspective you hear. I don't hear that kind of perspective in private in some of these spaces, certainly. And if you were hearing a little bit more of that, or a little bit more of a focus on that, their ambitions and their designs on the culture wouldn't inspire as much dread. And I say that as somebody, again, who I'm not sneeringly judgmental of the tech people. And I have an admiration for people who can do things I cannot do. And I have alignment on certain issues with them. But yeah, this is wildly anti-charismatic as a message and as a perspective, to say the least.
Yeah. And, you know, I'm optimistic, or I've a guarded optimism, but I generally kind of share Ezra Klein's recent view that perhaps the biggest kind of blind spot of progressivism is the role of bureaucracy, that it doesn't matter how much money you tax and spend and these big programs you roll out with big labels and multi-trillion-dollar, you know, price tags. If there's too much red tape for them actually to be implemented, if this country looks like California high-speed rail, where, okay, we spend a lot, we've got big ambitions, but then it doesn't actually work for people, then progressivism doesn't work. And you look at so much of the Biden agenda items that you could compare to the New Deal that were just as ambitious and very close to the same price tag, but then nothing got done. The multi-billion dollars for electric vehicle charging stations and only 14 got built. I agree with that argument. So when I see things like Vivek and Elon's Doge commission to slash bureaucracy and spending, I'm like, okay, there's a huge compelling need for that. But then you look under the trunk and you look at the kind of Nietzschean, strong man of history worldview of contempt kind of for normal people, and anger at sleepovers, like the need to replace the American value system, not just the American worker, but the American value system. You see some obvious problems here, that if you're going to be recommending big cuts, likely to not just the bureaucrats who are tinkering with rules about how cars can be made, but also on welfare and entitlement spending and the big disability programs we have in this country that perhaps need fixing. I've got an open mind to it. But if it's these two with a mindset that, like you said, might have some contempt with just normal people, with people trying to go about their day who are not, tech lords or engineering geniuses, who are just average people. And that's who's the kind of vanguard of your Trump coalition going after these programs that these people rely on. You're going to hit tension much more vicious and vitriolic than what we saw in the last week.
Understandably. And I think Tim Dillon, the comedian, when he was talking about this messaging of we need to win, and he said, who's we? I mean, that's the big question. Who is the we? It's hard to have a nation without a we. There's this group chat that I've been on that has tech people. One of the VCs was mocking, sneering at the MAGA-ists in this debate of America's for Americans, mocking that. And I said, look, if you want to lose to an insane moron like Laura Loomer, denigrate that idea and watch how fast you lose. Because most people who live in a country believe that the country should be serving the people who live in that country. And this has just opened up a little portal, a little window to see that the people who are getting behind the MAGA movement and the tech side don't even necessarily believe in the very basics of nationhood, which is quite ironic. And Yeah, the crack up has happened. It reminds me of sports when teams win and there are immediate resentments over people not getting credit. I know there's a policy question here, and that's more what's happening, but there's also an element of the tech side thinking, well, you needed us to win to get it done. You needed the David Sachs hosting these people. You needed Elon taking control of this platform, and that's why you won the election. I think there's a great argument for that. But then on the other side of it, the MAGA side, there's the messaging that we were all for grassroots is what really wins it. And we don't want you guys telling us what to do. This is what's happening with the spoils of victory. And that's part, at least from the outside, of what I'm seeing in the crack up.
I mean, they need an enemy, right? They were too victorious. Democrats are so in array. There's no national Democrat to go after, I guess Biden for the next few weeks, but realistically, no one cares, right? Like, it's all in the rear view mirror. There's no opponent. There's kind of a need for a national competition, Cold War dynamic with China, but that's not really working for these domestic debates, right? Like, China's not forcing us to outsource our IT base to India, right? Like, that's what we're doing.
The media was sidelined in this debate. They weren't even part of this debate. They're not even present to be the enemy in this particular conversation. I mean, it's debatable how much influence they will have going forward. There is no enemy, so it is natural that everybody turns on each other in this situation. I'm just going to be reading anything I can out of it. I didn't expect to be as fascinated by it as I've been, and your stuff has been great on it. Can we dish a little bit about tech culture? I want to have this conversation with you and be a little bit careful. No names, that sort of thing.
No call out culture.
No call out culture. None of Rick Perlstein, the liberal historian, saying that Mark Andreessen said these horrible quotes about people years and years ago. Nothing like that. But I think you've got a different perspective. You live in San Francisco. You go to Burning Man. We are in the midst of some of these people. Yeah. There's a lot going on out here. San Francisco is the weirdest town in the world, and not just for the old reasons, but for the following right now, in my opinion. Donald Trump won the election, an election that I think, at least in San Francisco, he might have been 2080, where the town theoretically in the way it voted was just ardently against this guy winning. And because he won it, it is 1920s party time in San Francisco. Everybody's going crazy and appears to have been secretly thrilled that the guardrails are off and you can do whatever you want with crypto and with AI. And that's this town. It's a boom bust town ever since the gold rush, and right now it is just pulsating with money and energy, and that's the current situation. And there are all these little intellectual movements that are all bounded within it, and I'm not even, wherever you want to take that, Lee, however you want to talk about it, is there a way we could describe some of this stuff to the people listening who might live in places where people have proper priorities?
Well, I think it's true, not just for San Francisco. I think San Francisco, it's particularly true because of the kind of tech optimist, crypto, weird, tech-related industries that are here that are going to benefit from deregulation and perhaps a more laissez-faire regulatory touch in the future. But I think it's true around many big, wealthy cities. Like if you're in New York, around finance, parts of DC, I'm sure Seattle too. I from someone I know, they were at a legal conference just after the election that was very kind of woke in the top line. Like, they had a panel on how to protect immigrants under the, second coming of Trump, but then immediately had a breakout session. Everyone went to lunch, and, people could not hold back their enthusiasm, because a lot of the lawyers at this conference work in mergers and acquisitions. They're excited to see a defanged FTC, less DOJ, more companies gobbling up. Yeah, Khan's getting booted out. Although maybe some of these conservatives have some influence, but the net effect is absolutely more go mergers and acquisitions. And it was palpable, according to this person at this conference. A lot of excitement from after you do the kind of public, the ostensible opposition, then you can kind of share your actual sentiments at the bar that it's going to be a great year next year, at least a year to make a lot of money. I mean, I know a lot of folks. I think we have some overlap in terms of social circles. Some other friends I know who are just, voted for Kamala but also have a lot of crypto holdings and have a lot of tech stock that they hope that equities rise next year. And there's just this sense that like Elon Musk and that whole kind of crew that has melded into the Trump world, that's the horse to bet on, that even though there's all these protectionist policies, maybe a shutdown of trade or new tariffs or, stopping certain immigrant programs, or, Trump has some kind of heterodox economic views. That was all campaign bluster. This is actually a libertarian moment where Trump does not need to get reelected. He's in there. He's unlike the first administration where he was bumbling and didn't know what to do and just kind of brought in random people who stabbed him in the back. Now he's razor focused and has Vivek and Elon Musk and others who are going to just go and create a more libertarian government, Calvin Coolidge type 1920s scenario. And there's a lot of excitement for that. Is that actually the case? I don't know. I actually don't have a good sense of this, because Trump has an incredibly ideologically diverse cabinet so far, and people like J.D. Vance and others are truly skeptical of this kind of numbers and budget-based view of America, rather than America as a nation that should not always prioritize economic growth over communities and creating social stability. But I don't know. But it is palpable. This dynamic of like, we hate Trump, but wink, wink, wink.
For those listening, you cannot see Lee was actually winking. Yes, that's certainly something I've noticed. It is palpable. There's energy in the city again. It is not only back from the COVID doldrums, it feels like. It's just, I could park in San Francisco at a variety of places for a while, and I've run into it a couple times. I rarely cross that bridge. I'm lazy. But when I do, it's just, oh my God, I can't. No, this is like the old days. I can't park. People are back. There's energy. And that's all part of the culture. I don't know how it influences some of the attached cultures. I'm fascinated by the effective altruists, for instance. I don't know how they factor into the Trump moment, or how they feel about it. They seem like they're more on the left, the rationalists are, but that might not, that may be a disservice to really explaining whatever the hell they got going on.
Yeah, I'm less familiar with them. I follow the SBF, dynamic. Yeah. I know Dustin Moskowitz, big funder of effective altruism. I don't really get it. Like, I think you can make moral justifications for charitable donations that I think are more compelling than what people typically make. Like, they make the argument that, okay, actually animals experience the most suffering of anyone in the world. So actually the effective altruist donations to end suffering should go to animal welfare. I feel like that's compelling. I just don't know why you need to give it a label, effective altruism. It's like, okay, that's you can make the case. Just make the case.
I just don't need a neurotic form of hedonism. And that seems like it comes out of there, where I'm going to be neurotic and worry about optimizing literally everything I do and how it's going to benefit the world. I'm going to live in that mental prison, and I'm going to be in some sort of polycule at the same time, because marriage, it's so inefficient. And again, it's this urge that the very high IQ people have to transcend that perhaps is the right decision for them personally, but it's just not something that I, as a boring suburban dad, can really vibe with. And I can't worry about everything that a lot of these people are worrying about and thinking about, when I've just got to live my contemptuously normal life and worry about my family. But I'm entertained by them. I'm interested in what they got going on and who they are, because again, a lot of these people they're supremely talented, and I like being in conversation and hearing ideas. I'm just not necessarily, I'm reflexively skeptical of a lot of what gets said in this town. And I don't know if the skepticism is rooted in my own bullshit detector sometimes, or my own kind of, I wouldn't say jealousy inspired discomfort, but I'm insecurity inspired. When I'm in the presence of two scientists who are talking about having their 200 IQ child, part of me feels, well, this sounds like some Icarus shit. But then another part of me feels, well, I have my kids the normal way, and they're going to be up against your kids, and that's kind of scary. And that's more of this personal problem I have versus whether or not they're right or wrong.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's worth separating out the different ways that effective altruists are engaging in kind of the ways that they life accelerate or accelerate their worlds personally and in terms of public policy. I think just like for every type of corporate philanthropy, for all of modern history, the stuff that's part of the outward facing public policy is a sham. Like when SBF was talking about, okay, well, pandemics are the worst thing possible, so we're going to have a super PAC that prevents the next pandemic, that gets politicians to care about pandemic planning. I mean, we just later found out he admitted to reporters and was DMing people, we've got to have these laudable sounding causes when we buy off these politicians, like when we need crypto regulations. Like, it's just like ESG or any type of corporate philanthropy around, when you see the Chevron posters about how much they love clean energy, like is this actually about your business, or making us just not hate you?
Can you just explain to the people listening what ESG is real quick? Because somebody might.
Yeah, and environmental, social, and governance. It came out of the 1980s. There was a demand that companies engage in social responsibility to like clean up their supply chains, get rid of child slavery, funding for South Africa's apartheid regime or whatever. And it just kind of morphed over the years into this demand that companies just make donations or ethical practices part of their business. And it kind of hit, I would say, a peak maybe 7 years ago, when BlackRock and a lot of the other big asset managers started saying that they would only fund companies that have proactive ESG programs. So suddenly the Fortune 500 all had ESG, and then other companies had ESG. But you peel back the layers, I think I'm probably the person that wrote the most from a left perspective that ESG is bullshit, but then it became a big thing on the right from Vivek and others saying that ESG is a way for communism or socialism to seep in and manipulate corporate practices. I mean, I think it's all bullshit. I think it's all basically a way for companies to just engage in much more sophisticated public relations. Like if you want to solve climate change, or you want to solve child slavery in the Congo, then pass a law. We don't need companies like putting a part of their marketing that they do this or don't do this, because it's all self-regulated. A lot of the companies that claim to be engaging in certain ESG practices are just lying. They just come up with their own criteria and their way of measuring a certain emissions or whatever. I interviewed one company that said they had this amazing emissions standard. They're a software company. They don't emit anything. So what? How can you use that as part of your metric to get ESG? Like then there's all these
we're
ESG
taking
bonds.
People from these countries with the biggest carbon footprint and replacing our workers with these visas, and we've found that actually reduces the carbon footprint.
There's also a racial component that okay, you're supposed to engage in better and more diverse racial hiring practices, but if you peel back the onion on that, it's a lot of it is funny. Like I talked to another CEO, I marked myself as a person of color CEO because then I get a higher ESG rating from these bond rating agencies. But he's like a white guy, but he's what's known as a quapa. He's a quarter
yes.
Asian. So
Khan's lingo we're speaking now.
I'm helping Razib promote the term, but he was a quapa, and he doesn't identify as white, but for the purposes of ESG, he decided to be a person of color because why not? So that's ESG. But I see some of the effective altruist stuff in the same vein, where companies enrich people who've gotten incredibly wealthy from software typically, or I guess crypto trading for SBF. They do it as kind of public relations to kind of engage in these laudable causes, to sometimes smuggle bad business practices or certain things that they don't want scrutiny. But then what you're talking about in terms of this, like, this whole ethical worldview around sex and bioengineering babies, I mean, I feel like we're in a special corner of America where we hear and see this a lot.
Yeah.
It hasn't really busted into the mainstream yet. And how this trickles into the culture and how it actually shapes policy, or how it kind of shapes the kind of class and demographic divide in this country. I mean, you could kind of spend a long time just musing over this, but I don't see how this is going to play out. I mean, I think some of it's bullshit. I don't know if they actually have the science, but in terms of the trajectory, it's probably closer than we realize. Like in the next decade, we're going to actually start seeing these kind of biohacked babies.
Yeah. And this has happened to me at least 3 times where I've been in a social setting with such people in these industries, and there will be a very intelligent woman with a background in STEM, and she will almost think that she's confessing something unusual, who will say after 2 drinks, start asking or floating, how can somebody facilitate a way for me to meet Elon Musk? And it's to have a baby with Elon Musk. This has happened to me 3 times. 3 times I have seen this, which I guess ties the loose end of, because you hear rumors about how many kids he has and why it wouldn't, explode into news stories. I guess there are a lot of willing participants, and there apparently are these women with IQs over 150 because they are type A and they have the ambitions of tech, and there are a lot of other, let's say, very trad impulses, incorporated in this whole thing, who, that's the ambition, and they're wondering, and unfortunately, I can't really help them out. I don't know Elon. I can't facilitate that meeting, but I wish them the best, I suppose, as this army that he's generating comes into formation.
I mean, I kind of appreciate it. I feel like I've lived my entire life where I only heard these sentiments about movie stars and like athletes. Yeah. And now it's about this like kind of autistic ketamine using billionaire who's very, like, I still like, as much as I get annoyed by Elon Musk's views and antics on social media, I really appreciate him. He's still so interesting,
I never hear it about Bezos. What's up with that? Do you feel a certain way about that if you're Jeff Bezos, that nobody wants the Bezos baby, despite what Amazon has accomplished?
That's a great point. No one wants it. Maybe they just know that he's not so freewheeling in terms of giving his sperm away, or inseminating people. But yeah, he's not, even though with like Jack Bezos, he's clearly redefined himself. He's not seen as like a sexual icon at all.
No, he doesn't talk about space. I think that's the problem.
And yet he has a space company. He has a competing space company.
I just said that, and it's so stupid. That's completely incorrect. I could not be more wrong. He's obsessed with space. He just doesn't have emotion.
No, but he's just not in the discourse. Like, the one thing that like maybe 7 years ago, I used to defend Elon Musk quite a bit with friends and social media when Tesla was just starting to take off. And that I knew a lot of leftists who would say, Elon's the worst. He stops, he prevents unionization. So therefore he's like the most iconic auto capitalist that we must oppose. And I'm like, well, what about just like the data? Like every Korean and Japanese automaker also opposes
I thought you were going to say wants to have his baby. I thought you were going to say wants to have his baby.
Yeah, they also want to have his babies. And, you look at the Korean auto parts plants in like Alabama, multiple people have been killed in them. It's like routine that people lose fingers and arms at these plants. Like they have some of the worst conditions in the entire auto industry. But then you look up who runs them. It's just some like middle-aged, balding Korean man who's not on social media. So because he doesn't post a lot, the leftists aren't mad at this guy who's actually killing workers in Alabama. But because Elon Musk posts a lot, people hate him. I think it's like that simple. Like if Bezos posted more, maybe he'd be more of a sex symbol. I don't know.
Yeah, he's really failing in that regard. And I think that's the ultimate takeaway people should have from this podcast is that Bezos, he needs to post more. We're trying to help you out, buddy. You need help, obviously, expanding your options out there. This has been fantastically your stuff. I can't recommend it highly enough. Not only is it rigorous, but I think artful. I really love the way that you did the Visa article and how you set it up with the Cognizant tech company, and there's a little bit of an aura of mystery and explanation. It's a great article, man. So you do fantastic work. Is there anything you want to plug as we do the outro?
No, I just want to say that it's always been fun to see you at these dark, evil tech gatherings and to discuss potentially playing tennis one day. You've got an incredible Substack. You're the only sports writer I read, and that's because you're a fantastic writer and an incredible person. So this has been great.
Oh, well, you're too nice. We can't play tennis one day, though. I've said it's Mulder and Scully fucking. It's the thing we say we're going to do, but it's just we can't. Something's going to go wrong if we do that. I'm convinced at this point. So we have to hold off on that. But thank you for saying that. And hey, man, Happy New Year.
Yeah, Happy New Year to you too.